Have you ever noticed that when you're speaking English, it can feel like there's this little translator in your head?
Yeah, like a middleman slowing everything down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to build the sentence in your native language first, and then, try to find the English words to match. It can be so frustrating.
It is. And it's incredibly common, too. It's one of the biggest things that holds learners back from fluency.
Well, today we're diving deep into how to actually ditch that translator and train your brain to think directly in English.
It's a total game changer.
It really is. And we'll be giving you tons of practical tips and strategies that you can start using right away.
By the end of this, you'll have a clear plan to start thinking in English more and more each day.
Okay, so let's get into it. Why is this whole thinking in English thing so important? I mean, what's the big deal?
Well, first of all, it has a massive impact on fluency. Think about it. When you're translating in your head, it creates all these pauses and hesitations.
Right. It makes the whole conversation feel a bit, clunky.
Exactly. It's like you're constantly hitting the brakes.
And it's not just the speed. Sometimes trying to translate directly just doesn't work, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, English and other languages don't always have perfect word-for-word equivalents.
So you end up with these weird, unnatural sentences.
Exactly. Our sources, Henry and Sarah, talked about this student they knew, Pedro. He was a Spanish speaker, and he would always say, I have 30 years.
Instead of, I am 30 years old.
Yeah. It's understandable, because that's how you'd say it in Spanish.
Yeah.
But it just sounds, well, off in English.
It highlights how translating directly doesn't always cut it.
No, it doesn't. It's about understanding the whole structure and flow of English, not just swapping out words.
So thinking in English helps us avoid those awkward mistakes.
It does. And it also makes us sound way more confident.
Oh, yeah. Because we're not second-guessing ourselves all the time.
Exactly. When we're not stuck in translation mode, we can just speak more naturally, from the gut.
It's like native speakers, they don't translate in their heads, do they?
No, they don't. They just think and speak. And that's what we're aiming for, too.
Okay, so it's clear that thinking in English is the goal. But let's be real, it can be pretty tough to actually do it right.
It can be. It's a process. It takes time and effort.
So why is it so hard? What makes it such a challenge?
Well, for one thing, it's the power of habit. We've spent our whole lives thinking in our native language.
It's like our default setting.
Exactly. Our brains are wired that way.
So trying to switch to English, it feels really weird and unnatural at first.
It does. And as Henry and Sarah pointed out, a lot of the time, it's even happening subconsciously.
Oh, like we don't even realize we're translating in our heads.
Yeah, exactly. It just happens automatically.
That makes sense. And then there's the fear of making mistakes, too.
Oh, absolutely. That's a big one. So many learners are terrified of saying something wrong.
So they end up overthinking every word and phrase.
Yeah. And they get stuck in this cycle of translating and editing, which just slows them down even more.
Henry and Sarah talked about this student, Mia. I remember that part.
Yeah, Mia. She had good English skills, but she was so scared of messing up that she could barely get a sentence out.
She would just freeze up, wouldn't she?
She would. She'd pause for ages, trying to find the perfect way to say things.
It's like she was aiming for perfection all the time.
Which is impossible, really. Even
Yeah.
native speakers make mistakes.
All the time. It's just part of speaking.
Exactly. And the more we focus on perfection, the less we actually speak.
And the less we practice, the less fluent we become.
It's a catch-22, isn't it?
It is. Okay, so habit and fear are two big roadblocks. What else?
Well, vocabulary plays a big role, too.
Right. If we don't know the English word for something, our brain automatically jumps back to our native language.
It's like a reflex.
And it's not just about recognizing words. We need to actually be using them right.
Yes, actively using them in our thoughts and speech. Otherwise, they just sit there in our passive vocabulary, useless.
So even if we know a word, if we're not used to thinking with it, it won't come out naturally when we speak.
Right, and then we end up back in translation mode.
Got it. So vocabulary or lack of it can really hold us back.
It can. And finally, there's the issue of exposure.
Exposure.
Yeah, like how much English we're actually using on a daily basis.
Aha, I see.
If we're only speaking English in class, for example, that's not enough to really train our brains to think in English.
It's like trying to learn to play the guitar by only practicing once a week. You're not going to get very far.
Exactly. We need constant, consistent exposure to English to make it stick.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of thinking in English, and we've looked at some of the reasons why it's so difficult.
Right. Now let's get to the good stuff.
The solutions.
Exactly. How can we actually start training our brains to think in English?
Let's dive in. What's the first strategy?
Immersion. It's the foundation of language learning.
When people hear immersion, they think about moving to an English-speaking country.
Which can be great, but it's not the only way.
No. Immersion is about creating an English-speaking environment wherever you are.
Exactly. It's about surrounding yourself with English as much as possible.
So how do we do that? What are some practical tips?
Well, one easy thing is to change the language settings on your devices.
Like your phone and computer.
Yeah. Switch them to English.
It might feel weird at first.
It might,
Mm-hmm.
but you get used to it really quickly.
And it's a great way to just keep seeing and interacting with English all the time.
It is. And then there's media consumption.
Ah, yes. Movies, TV shows, YouTube.
All of that. Make a conscious effort to watch and listen to things in English.
You might need subtitles at first, but try to wean yourself off them gradually.
And don't forget about podcasts and audiobooks.
Oh, yeah. Those are great for when you're commuting or doing chores.
Exactly. You're just passively absorbing the language.
So it's all about exposure, really. The more English we hear and see, the more natural it becomes.
And the easier it becomes to start thinking in English, too.
Okay, so immersion is key. What's next?
Strategy number 2 is inner monologue.
Talking to yourself in English.
Exactly.
Might sound a bit crazy, but I've heard it can be really effective.
It is. It's like having your own personal English practice session going on in your head.
So how do we actually do this?
It's simple. Just start narrating your day in English.
Like, I'm getting dressed now, I'm making breakfast, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Just describe what you're doing as you're doing it.
You can even ask yourself questions in English.
Yeah, like what should I wear today? Or what am I going to have for lunch?
And then answer them in English, too.
Exactly. It might feel a little strange at first.
Like you're going a bit mad.
Haha, maybe. But the more you do it, the more natural it becomes.
And the best part is, nobody can hear you.
So you can make all the mistakes you want.
No pressure at all. Just you and your English thoughts.
Okay, strategy number 3, word association.
Or dissociation.
Yeah, this is about building direct connections between English words and the ideas they represent.
Without translating.
Exactly. So for example, if I say tree,
I shouldn't think of the word for tree in my native language.
no, you should just picture a tree in your mind.
Okay, so straight from the English word to the image.
Exactly. It works for verbs and adjectives too.
So if I say run, I should just imagine someone running.
Yeah, exactly. No translation needed.
That's interesting. So we're basically bypassing the whole translation process.
We are. And it helps us think in English much faster.
Because we're not getting bogged down by the extra step of translation.
Right. Okay, strategy number 4, speaking without fear.
This is so important. We talked about this earlier.
Yeah, the fear of making mistakes can really paralyze us.
It stops us from actually speaking and practicing.
And it keeps us trapped in translation mode.
So how do we overcome this fear?
Well, the first step is to just accept that mistakes are going to happen.
They're inevitable.
Everyone makes them, even native speakers.
And they're actually a good thing, aren't they?
They are. They're how we learn and improve.
So instead of trying to be perfect, we should just focus on speaking.
Exactly. Find opportunities to speak English as much as possible.
Talk to friends, join language exchange groups, even talk to yourself in the mirror.
It doesn't matter who you're talking to as long as you're speaking.
The more we speak, the more confident we'll become.
And the less we'll need to rely on that internal translator.
Okay, so speak without fear. What's the final strategy?
Building daily habits.
This is all about consistency, isn't it?
It is. It's about making English thinking a regular part of your routine.
So not just cramming in a big study session once a week.
No, it's about incorporating small, consistent efforts into your daily life.
So what are some examples of these daily habits?
Well, one thing you can do is think about your plans for the day in English.
Like when you wake up in the morning.
Yeah, just run through your schedule in your head in English.
Okay, that's easy enough. What else?
You could keep a journal in English.
Just a few sentences each day.
Yeah, that's all it takes. Just write about your day, your thoughts, anything really.
And it helps to solidify our English thinking patterns.
It does. And throughout the day, you can challenge yourself to describe things around you in English.
Like, that's a blue car, or this coffee is hot.
Exactly. Just little things like that.
And it all adds up, doesn't it?
It does. And then before you go to sleep, you can review your day in English.
Like a mental recap.
Yeah. Think about what happened, how you felt, what you learned.
So we're essentially surrounding ourselves with English thoughts all day long.
Exactly. And it all contributes to training our brains to think in English more naturally.
Okay, so to recap, our 5 key strategies are immersion, inner monologue, word association, speaking without fear, and daily habits.
Pick one or two that resonate with you and start incorporating them into your life.
You'll be amazed at how much progress you can make.
All right, now it's time to put some of these strategies into action.
Let's do a little interactive exercise. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, first things first. Take a look around you, wherever you are right now.
And I want you to try and describe your surroundings in English.
Don't translate. Just think in English.
For example, you might think, I see a window, or there's a lamp on the table.
Easy peasy. Take a few seconds and give it a go.
All right, how did that feel?
Even if you only came up with a few words, that's a great start.
Now, let's try another one.
I want you to think about your morning routine
From the moment you wake up to the moment you leave the house.
and try to describe it step by step in English.
For example, I woke up at 7 a.m., I brushed my teeth, I had breakfast.
Simple as that. Take your time and see how it goes.
Okay, last one. We're going to play a quick word association game.
I'll say a word in English, and you just think of the first English word that comes to mind.
No translating, just your gut reaction.
Okay, ready? First word?
Happy.
What comes to mind?
Next word.
Water.
Think of an English word associated with water.
Last word. Big.
Hopefully you were able to come up with those words without translating.
It's amazing how quickly our brains can start making those English connections.
So if it felt a little difficult today, don't worry.
To process.
Just keep practicing.
And remember, even small amounts of daily practice can make a big difference.
Before we go, let's leave you with a few final tips to stay motivated.
Remember, this is a journey. It takes time.
Be patient with yourself.
And make English a part of your daily life.
Listen to English music, watch English movies, talk to yourself in English.
Find ways to make it fun and enjoyable.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
They're proof that you're learning.
And remember to celebrate your progress.
Every little step counts.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this thought.
Thinking in English is a skill. And like any skill, it gets easier with practice.
The more you do it, the better you'll become.
We'd love to hear about your experiences with thinking in English.
Share your favorite tips and strategies in the comments.
Keep practicing, keep learning, and keep thinking in English.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
And until next time, happy English thinking.